Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. Live from New York City, we are here for the Divisional Round episode of the show. This season, we're pulling back the curtain on the grind of betting an NFL season with an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows. Each episode gives you a seat at the table as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise.
Don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytic.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean? The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
All right, we're back for the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. This is probably the best weekend, in my opinion. We'll have 4 games. We'll go through each game. We'll do a little bit of a recap on what happened last week in the wild card round. We'll talk through a couple of the coaching carousel moves that were just made and give out some some thoughts around there. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. This is going to be the last full episode of the Noise Podcast for the season. Thanks again so much for listening throughout the year. Really appreciate all the support. I've talked a ton about how much the show has meant to me and getting back behind the mic again this season. So it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a great experience. Don't worry, we are not leaving you out to dry for the rest of the NFL season. All of my picks will still be available in our free Discord. Remember, Discord is the only place to get all of my bets in real time. We'll have some more video and pick coverage for the final couple games of the season, including the Super Bowl. But this is going to be the last full-length podcast that we'll do for the NFL season. So again, thanks so much for listening. All right, let's talk a little coaching carousel. After the Texans beat the Steelers handily at home, Mike Tomlin resigns, quote-unquote fired. Right, we know the Steelers have only had 3 coaches in their history, aren't really big on a lot of turnover at the coaching position, but Mike Tomlin gets the boot / gets to retire. I don't know if we'll see him again. I think Tomlin is a great example of maybe takes a year for TV or something like that before he gets before he lands on his feet. But Hall of Famer, right? Legend, honestly, right, for his longevity and the winning season record, right? Never had a losing season. This is uncharted territory for NFL head coaches. That being said, I think it's very clear that Tomlin has outstayed his time as an NFL coach. The game has obviously moved in a way that he hasn't been able to keep up with. The game has evolved beyond his coaching ability, right? You haven't seen, he's been one of the last coaches to adapt to the modern game, adapt to fourth down decision making, adapt to time management, optimization. Really just, I think, holding the Steelers back for many years. I know he hasn't been blessed with the best roster over the last couple of years. He's certainly struggled, right? They haven't had a consistent quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger retired. They really haven't had a ton of talent on the offensive side of the ball at all for the last couple of years. I know he's been involved with the decision making, so I think with him out of the way, perhaps an upgrade there as well. But Pittsburgh is obviously going to be an interesting coaching opportunity with kind of that in your back pocket, knowing that you're going to be there for a while. And the Steelers, the Rooney family are they tend to stick with their coach and give them a really loose chain. So I think I think we'll see. I'm not saying it's going to be John Harbaugh, but because it's in division. I'm not sure if he'll want to do that, but maybe a John Harbaugh type of coach. A little bit more experience under his belt, somebody who has some longevity in the league already. I think that could be an interesting candidate for the Steelers. But moving along, kind of, there's some stuff that happened, obviously, at the end of Week 18 that we kind of glossed over a little bit with the Harbaugh news, Stefanski. These were stuff that we kind of expected and not really going to make a lot of it right now, just because it's not really going to impact these games going forward. But what I do want to touch on as we sort of finish the recap for last week is Greg Roman, OC for the Chargers, fired. Finally. He's been terrible. as Justin Herbert's offensive coordinator. He was terrible after that one season of Lamar Jackson, right? Once everybody figured out what they were running with Lamar, he was terrible. And I think Greg Roman has been one of these coaches that is just not adaptable, doesn't know how to change the game plan. Again, very unlucky this year with the offensive line injuries, but you have a season where Justin Herbert just, they can't move the ball. They couldn't run the ball all season long. They seemingly couldn't use Ladd McConkey, which I can't believe after the rookie season that he had that, he was being covered at a rate that was impossible for him to get even more targets. But and I know Justin Herbert had some injuries and he did not play his best from an accuracy standpoint throughout the year. But again, Greg Roman was somebody that needed to go, and as well as Kevin Patullo on the Eagles. Very, very glad, and I'm sure Eagles fans are glad that he's gone as well. Really, I know the part of the conversation is going to be Jalen Hurts and how good is Jalen Hurts really, right? When he had Kellen Moore as his OC, he was entering top 10 quarterback conversation. Now with Kevin Patullo in this offense, you're talking about, bottom 10 quarterback in the league right now. So, where Jalen Hurts is from a talent level, from a skill level, is probably somewhere in the middle. We can talk about quarterback evaluation in another episode, but Kevin Patullo being gone is a good start for this Eagles offense trying to get back to being a Super Bowl contender. And really surprised, honestly, that they were not able to take advantage of a 49ers team that was incredibly banged up, that lost George Kittle during the game. And just really, I'm not sure how the Eagles couldn't move the ball against this 49ers defense that has been decimated by injury. You have third stringers and practice squad players playing linebacker. Eric Kendricks had like 15 million tackles and he got there last month. Not that he is a superstar. So I'm just really surprised that after all this time and after all the little flashes that we saw from this Eagles offense trying to get out of mediocrity, they couldn't do it with all the talent that they have in that room. You can blame Jalen Hurts all you want, but this is a scheme that was, quite frankly, boring, not well executed, and just lacked the modern game that you're seeing from, the Shanahan tree and now the McVay tree. You're just a guy like Kevin Patullo had no originality in the scheme and really held this team back the entire year and wasted what turned into, quite a strong defense. So really disappointed in the Eagles. Not that I was really rooting for the Eagles as a former Giants fan, but disappointed in seeing them kind of look so poor against the 49ers. And I'm glad that the market pushed this bet out so much, right? Like with the 49ers ending up closing as plus 5.5, plus 6 even in some spots, underdogs, right? I was talking about wanting to bet the 3, maybe even the 3.5 when it came out. Didn't end up doing it because we missed that. We missed the opportunity to bet the 3, and I really didn't want to start chasing the market as there was a ton of Eagles support, which was well warranted at the time. So lucky for me, right, that I didn't end up betting the Eagles, but a side that I really liked and a side that I thought was, a team that could make a run in these playoffs. So they never figured it out, and I'm glad that the Eagles did the right thing in saying, hey, I know this was only one season, but this absolutely did not work. We're committed to Hurts. We're committed to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. We are going to run this back, but we are not running this scheme again. So I think that is a really good sign for the Philadelphia Eagles moving forward. And my question to this, now that we've, kind of discussed both the roles, my question to the viewers, right, or my question to people in general is, which is a more attractive job? Would you rather take the OC job at the Chargers where you have Herbert and Ladd McConkey and, Gadsden and a bunch of gadgets, right? You have one of the best quarterbacks in the league talent-wise in Herbert. Or would you rather go to the Eagles with all the pedigree and also one of the best offensive talents in the league in terms of their skill positions on top of one of the better offensive lines? So I think both of these jobs are extremely attractive, right? Both defenses are going to continue to be pretty good in 2026. So I think if you're an offensive coordinator or, if you're somebody that's gunning for a head coaching job sometime in the future, both of these are going to be pretty attractive jobs to take. So I'm curious, leave it in the comments below which job you guys think is more attractive to a potential OC candidate in 2026. So as we think about the scheme of a team and the decision making that goes into calling a game and calling a script, I think it's a apt time to talk about what I'm calling the decision making epidemic in the NFL. We are at a point in time where it is abundantly clear what to do on fourth down situations, when to kick, when not to, how to manage a clock when you're leading or trailing, how to make these decisions to kind of optimize the end of a half or an end of a game. I think we're at the point in time where almost everybody is pretty clear on what should be happening, on how you should do it. And time again, these coaches that are put into these positions are not doing it. We'll start by dissecting a couple of these games that happened last weekend. Nothing was more evident than Matt LaFleur. And Matt LaFleur is a coach that I think from an offensive perspective, a scheming perspective, is good. And this is kind of a play on the play, right? Where we're talking about coaches that are not making good decisions, right? We're not just talking about bad coaching, right? At this point in time, you might even put Mike Tomlin in that category, right? Not only is he not making great decisions and he's not really optimizing on fourth down, he's also not really calling a good game in general. Not that he was really responsible for the play call, right? That was Arthur Smith. We're not going to blame everything on Tomlin, but I want to put in a new category, right, where I'll put Matt LaFleur, and kind of Kyle Shanahan falls victim to this often, even though I think Shanahan is deserving of the coach of the year and, one of the quote-unquote masterminds in the NFL. Matt LaFleur is calling a great game, right? We've talked time and time again about the Packers being one of, if not the most efficient offense in the NFL in terms of EPA per play, in terms of success rate. Packers are excellent. Jordan Love has played excellent. And Matt LaFleur is certainly getting the most out of, a player in Jordan Love who doesn't strike you as a top 5 or top 10 talent at quarterback. But he's certainly getting the most out of him, and he's certainly allowing him to play within the confines of the system up to that caliber. Maybe not top 5, but certainly in top 10 conversation. So when I look at this game where the Packers are up 21-6 at halftime, your first question is how? How did they lose, right? They're getting way too tight, way too conservative in the second half of games where they have leads. Matt LaFleur has put them in situations where they continue to shoot themselves in the foot because time and time again, they have a big lead or they're playing with the lead and slowly start to allow the other team to come back in the game, getting too conservative and too predictable with the play call, right? If you're up by multiple scores, you're going to run the ball. Everybody knows that. But you need to be able to run it efficiently enough that you're able to kill clock and continue to move the ball, or you need to stay aggressive enough that you're going to be able to maintain your lead, right? I think maybe Jacksonville was a good example of this throughout the year where they know their run game is not that efficient. They know they're not doing that well. So they keep the ball in the air and they keep throwing, right? That adds some variability to your game script, and that, perhaps doesn't use as much time if you have drops or you have incompletions or whatever, but at least you're putting yourself in a position to try to win the game. Don't worry, I'll get to Liam Cohen in a second, but I just want to end my thought on Matt LaFleur here, where it is a growing problem in the NFL where these guys that we think are calling a great game are until they feel like they kind of done their job, right? Okay, we have a 21-6 lead. We look good going into halftime. And they missed that field goal, which would have ended up being important. They missed another field goal in the second half, right? And if they make that field goal, if they make one of those field goals, right, and then that allows them to have a 1-point deficit instead of a 4-point deficit, which means that on the final drive of the game, they just need to kick a field goal to win. Obviously, everything would have changed if the kicks are made and, and this and that. But point being, right, we might not ever have had this conversation if Brandon McManus is able to make one or both of those kicks. So regardless of that, I think it's important to note that when you're handicapping a game with Matt LaFleur or a coach that fits a similar profile, second half angles are going to always be there against these guys because they're not holding leads. They're not holding leads well. We bet Chicago around halftime at plus 15.5 live in the Discord. I wish I could remember what the money line was. I would have never have bet it, right? But you probably saw like a 12-1 something on the money line. And that was, I believe 15.5 was kind of the peak. I'm sure there was some better numbers out there, on a fringe situation, but what was readily available at that point live in the game was about 15.5. So that's what we took. Obviously, cashes with ease, but Chicago on the money line at that point in time would have been if anyone has that ticket, please let me know, because I'm curious how big it got during the game in terms of the price. And I do want to touch on Liam Cohen really quick. Obviously, we took the Jaguars. I was pretty big on the Jaguars. I hate to go against Josh Allen. This really sucks for me too. I've bet on the Bills for probably the last 3 years and have gotten my dreams crushed by Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs in almost every season. So to finally get an opportunity to kind of go on the other side, this is a Bills team that I think is far weaker than the Bills teams that have been in the playoffs the last few teams. Of course, now they get a statement win where Josh Allen puts a team on his back and really just takes over the game. So I hate to be on the other side of that. We'll get into the game by game in a couple minutes, and I think I'll be disappointed again in where we end up. But talking about this game a little bit, I think the moment got a little too big for Trevor Lawrence. He does have playoff experience. He's played in a couple playoff games before, losing to the Chiefs a couple of years ago. But what I really want to talk about here is the final sequence of that game, where the Jags are now leading. I think it was 27-24 is the final score, but Jags were leading by 3 coming down to the Bills' final drive, right? The Bills are driving with about 3 minutes left in the game. You kind of get the sense that a stop ends the game, or the Bills are going to end up scoring and tying this one up. So you're kind of at the edge of your seat, and I think where Liam Cohen started to mess this up was just allowing the game to happen. When you have that right after Josh Allen got the first down, where they had the ruling that he was initially short, he was able to get the first. Right after that, they throw the bomb to Brandon Cooks, 36 yards down the field. You're now at 2:26 on the clock, 1st and 10 for the Buffalo Bills. I'm sitting there screaming at my TV, call timeout. Liam Cohen, call timeout. Well, they're going to score, right? They're in field goal range at the worst. You know that the offense is moving the ball. They are going to score. Call timeout. Your priority now is to be able to get the ball back in the hands of your offense. You can stop the ball almost whenever you want when you're on offense. You can throw it out of bounds. You can spike it. You can get out of bounds. You can control the time when you're on the offensive side of the ball. When you're on defense, you're at the will of the opposing offense. So when you have the opportunity with all of your timeouts to stop the clock, use the 2-minute warning as an additional timeout, you must do it. I can't understand why Liam Cohen didn't call at least one of his timeouts before the 2-minute warning, and ends up getting this all the way down to a minute, right? And then on the Josh Allen tush push sneak, they let him score, which was the correct move, right? At that point in time, you'd rather them score a touchdown, because then you're going to get the ball back. And there's a counterpoint to that to argue that the Bills actually should have kneeled. Yeah, it's kneeled, right? The Bills should have kneeled in that situation. So, that's a tough call to make, right? Because if you kneel and then for whatever reason, let's say you fumble or something, you don't get it, the whole staff's going to get fired, and that's going to be on Josh Allen's head for the rest of his career. I understand why they didn't do it, although you could argue it was optimal for them to do it. But Jacksonville, I didn't like how Liam Cohen handled that end of game. I'm not saying that the Jags definitely would have won had he have called the timeout at 2:26, right? Obviously, had they had just stopped, the bombs to Brandon Cooks, that might have, been a better way to win the game. But the Jaguars fall short, and throwing the interception at the end of the game was kind of just the cherry on top. A minute left in the game. Again, enough time for them to score, and letting them score, letting Josh Allen score that touchdown was the optimal way to do it. But I disagree with the not using his timeout at that point in the game. All right, well, enough about last week. Let's talk about the weekend coming up, the games that we're all looking forward to. We'll go in time order and just kind of give a quick breakdown of what we're doing, any picks we might have in the game. And I think what's going to be a theme of this is it's most important to note that by this point in time of the season, you are betting into what is one of the most efficient markets in the world. The NFL playoffs are one of the most efficient markets because of all the time that's been put into these lines. Not only are there far less games for the market makers to deal with, right? They have a season's worth of data to actually base this off of. So, when you're betting into, early lines in week 1 and 2, you're using a lot of priors, or you're kind of making some assumptions that you think the market hasn't caught up to yet. Those really don't exist when we get to the playoffs, and especially into the second round of the playoffs. I don't think that you're going to get much from me in terms of, well, I think this line is bad, or I think that, there's a mistake here that we can take advantage of. You're really just not going to get that at this point in time. You're not going to get that in the playoffs. We might still take some positions that we like, but we're not going to find market inefficiencies or anything like that. On the prop market, you still can. You need to move quickly on stuff like that. And again, part of the game is trying to value what an injury means, or what a schematic choice means to the team's actual outputs. So that's stuff that we'll talk about a little bit. And there's a lot of key injuries that I want to highlight. That's keeping me off some bets for right now, but we'll talk through each game. And again, remember, all of my official plays will always be released for free in the Discord. I usually release more props on game day. That's where I've played all year. Sometimes going against some of the market moves, or taking numbers that have been bet too far, or just waiting for those final injury reports to come out to be able to to make a bet. So make sure you're checking out the Discord on game day. We've had a couple fun parlays that we've put in there all season. We've hit quite a few as well. So we'll look to hit another big one this weekend, but make sure you guys jump in the Discord. So first game on the docket is the Buffalo Bills at the Denver Broncos. Broncos number 1 seed, obviously off the bye, getting a chance to face a banged up Buffalo team. Josh Allen suffered, I don't know how many injuries that I witnessed during that game, whether it be hard hits to the head, hard hits to the leg. I told you guys last week his foot is broken. Josh Allen at 6'5" and 2-something is obviously a specimen, but there's only so much a man can take, and I think he's really banged up at this point in time. I'm not expecting him to have. I'm not expecting that to really affect him going into the game, but over the course of the game, I think he's continued to take a bunch of hits, and I worry about his health at this point in the season. But on top of that, right, you have significant injuries to the wide receiver core. Both Shavers and Gabe Davis will be out for the season. I think Terrell Shavers ended up playing half the game on a partially torn ACL, which is a feat in itself. Both those guys will be out for the season, leaving the wide receiver core for the Bills to be Shakir, Brandon Cooks, and Keon Coleman, who's been benched multiple times this year. And after that, that's it. That's the entire wide receiver core. Dalton Kincaid, who I was high on last week, is also just hurt. He did not look healthy during that game, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him continue to be banged up coming into this week. And you might end up seeing a bunch of Spencer Hawes, who is a third string tight end, but you're running out of bodies out there. And I'm concerned for the health of this team overall. They're just not they're not healthy on an offensive side of the ball. And I'm struggling for a second because I definitely said Spencer Hawes, not Hayes. Spencer Hawes being the Philadelphia 76ers center for a couple of years, but we're looking at Hayes on the Buffalo Bills. But anyway. So Jackson Hawes is his name. That's bad for me. Jackson Hawes, first, who not Hayes, but he's the third string tight end, and I expect him to get a couple targets in this one. Other important injuries: Jordan Poyer, safety, is going to be out He was questionable going into last game. We thought he might miss as well. Ended up playing, but had to leave the game at some point. The one thing that I found interesting on the injury report is the practice window opened up for Ed Oliver, who put a limited, and then I believe was a full participant on Wednesday. So looks like Ed Oliver is, all signs are pointing to he's coming in. He obviously there might be a little bit of rust, seeing though he's been on IR, but he had a biceps injury. So I think from a, re-injury standpoint, he should be kind of okay. I'd be more concerned if it was a lower body injury, I guess, but if he goes, that's a really interesting addition for the Bills, because we've talked time and time again about how bad their run defense is, and their run defense being extremely gettable. Despite some good season numbers, right? On the season, they've performed decently well. But as we saw in the Jacksonville game, I think that was a little bit more opponent-based than their actual ability, and especially without Ed Oliver, they have been. It's been possible to attack the Bills on the run, pretty easily. But getting Ed Oliver back really clogs up the middle, and he was their most important run stopper before getting injured. So if he's a full participant, I'm not saying that this is going to make the Buffalo defense good, but that's a really interesting development that we have here. And if he was a full participant today, which I think he was, and he trends towards playing in this game, that could be pretty significant for the Bills, assuming that he's able to to log enough snaps or play a full game coming this weekend. So the Bills, it's been kind of a joke on Twitter this week that the Bills are attacking Pat Surtain by not attacking him, because where the Broncos defense is at its strongest is with their defensive player of the year, cornerback Pat Surtain, who's supposed to shut down the number one wide receiver on the other team, but the Bills don't really have one. Khalil Shakir is going to be their de facto number one out of the slot, and I don't think Surtain generally shadows a player into the slot. The Broncos have been good covering the slot this season, so I wouldn't necessarily think that that's a weakness. But long story short, right, this Broncos pass rush is one of, if not the best in the league. They are top 5 in pressure rate. They are number 1 in sacks. They are going to get after Josh Allen. Josh Allen is certainly going to be forced to run, and I'm sure that that's going to be a popular angle. Josh Allen rushing props. I don't think that I would recommend playing it pre-game, but I think live, especially if the Broncos are able to get a lead, that's something that we're going to want to look at, because if the pressure gets home, especially the Broncos, Vance Joseph likes to blitz. Broncos have a pretty high blitz rate. So if the Broncos are sending a bunch of pressure, you're going to see Josh Allen take off, because he doesn't have anyone to throw to. Doesn't have anyone out there that's going to create any separation against these cornerbacks. And he's going to rely on guys that I thought played in the NBA, right? He's going to rely on pass catchers that we just, we can't expect to be getting leverage or separation against Pat Surtain. So I'm very, very concerned with the Bills' offense, and I was concerned with them last week, but they ended up being okay. We're going to need another superhuman effort out of Josh Allen to keep the Bills in this playoff run. Looking at the Broncos offensively, they have struggled efficiency-wise running the ball. RJ Harvey has been very good this year from a fantasy perspective, right? He's scoring a lot of touchdowns and, kind of makes the Broncos seem like they have a good run game, but from an efficiency standpoint, hasn't been that great this year. So I continue to be a little bit concerned with that. I'm not a big Bo Nix guy. I don't think he's particularly great. I am concerned with his ability to play up in this game. I think him and Sean Payton together are a good combination, because Sean Payton knows how to play to his strengths, or at least hide his weaknesses, I should say. And his weaknesses are, making difficult throws. What they want to do is run a lot of short stuff, a lot of simple stuff. When they push the ball down the field, they want to really make sure they have it. You're not seeing Bo Nix really throw the ball into tight windows and stuff like that. And again, this is good for an offense that is controlling the game, right? If you have a good defense that allows you to control the pace of the game, you really want a quarterback who is that traditional game manager, right? Who's not going to turn the ball over, who's not going to make a boneheaded play that forces you to, be in a short field on defense. That's where Bo Nix excels, but my concern when we get into the playoffs is the inability to make explosive plays. The Broncos offense just doesn't really profile like a team that is going to get a bunch of explosive downfield passes. They're really going to rely on efficient short passing, and hopefully their run game is good enough to keep this offensive long. So where this game opened up was Buffalo -1, which was pretty surprising. And this has flipped all the way over to Denver -1. I wouldn't be surprised if this closes even further than that. I agree with the move directionally. I don't think that Buffalo warranted being a favorite at Denver. I don't think that beating Jacksonville in the manner that they did is deserving of a rating increase at all. And even if it was, all the injuries that the Bills sustained should have at least neutralized where they're at. So from a rating perspective, I don't see how the Bills would have opened up a favorite. I probably agree with this line. If we had bet it early enough, I would have been on the Broncos. But and again, remember, moving through 0, although it's a 2-point move, is you can't treat it like any other 2-point move. It's not super significant. The value of the point of a +1 versus a -1 is not high at all. But I'm not going to play this one pregame. I do lean Denver. I think Denver wins this game. I think Denver is able to generate enough offense to keep Josh Allen off the field. Long drives, sustained drives, a lot of rushing. This should be enough to keep Denver in the lead. And this Buffalo defense is gettable. We saw Jacksonville get them just fine. And I think the Denver offense, although less explosive than Jacksonville's, maybe has the pedigree to get it done. And defensively, I think Josh Allen's going to be in hell. Everything that the Jaguars do well, the Broncos do it better. So I'm very concerned with Josh Allen and his health right now, and I'm very concerned with the Bills' ability to move the ball. You're going to need a Herculean effort out of Josh Allen. And I'm not saying he doesn't have it in him. I'm not saying that he hasn't done it before, but these are just not things that you can rely on. These are not things that are indicative of future success. So if Josh Allen beats me once again, I guess I'm just going to have to take it on the chin. But for a side in this one, I lean the Broncos. I'll probably end up getting involved with teasers on the Bills at this point, but I will be on the Broncos in contests. So again, I'll let you guys know in the Discord if I end up betting the Broncos, or especially if I end up betting them live at any point. Maybe we get a slow first drive from Bo Nix. Guys are coming off the bye. Maybe they're a little bit slow. That could give us an opening to bet Denver. But for now, I'm leaving it, and I will be using Denver in contests. Next game we'll look at is the 49ers going into Seattle to play the Seahawks. Both teams that came off the bye are playing on Saturday, naturally. 49ers get really rough injury news with George Kittle suffering an Achilles injury. This on top of all of the injuries that we talked about last week. We talked about how their defensive linebacking core is just torn apart. They lost all of their linebackers. They're playing guys who weren't on the team a month ago, guys who are probably, they don't even know each other in the locker room quite yet. So again, hats off to Shanahan for the job that he's done as the 49ers head coach. It's been a masterful performance by him as a head coach, and really getting the most out of a team that, is perhaps the least talented team left in the playoffs, or at least the lowest rating that I have given the injuries in the playoffs right now. So I'm not saying that Seattle -7.5 is a good bet, but I have a hard time seeing where San Francisco scores. And that'll bring us to kind of what we're looking at here, right? This game opens up at 7 for Seattle and immediately bet out to 7.5. You're seeing a little bit of buyback on the 49ers. I'm just scanning the market right now. You're seeing a little bit of buyback at the 7.5. So there's some juice 7s that are back in the market. Again, another game that I'm just not betting on the pregame side. I think it's too heavy. right? I think Seattle at a juice 7 or a 7.5 is too many points. This is a little bit similar to the Rams handicap last week, where if I were to, any way I shake this game out, there's just not a way that I get to a market rating that makes the Seahawks this many points better than the 49ers. Again, even if I used a full 2 for home field advantage, let's just say, I have a hard time seeing that, the Seattle Seahawks are a full 5.5 points better than the 49ers on a neutral. It's just it's a lot of points. That being said, I'm not going to catch the knife with the 49ers. I'm not going to be on the other side of that. And the irony of that is last week, right? If you were that guy on the Panthers or that guy on the 49ers last week, catching the knife with taking points that were probably not deserved, you ended up winning both those bets. And that kind of just goes to show you, when you have market inefficiencies, you might want to just play it and kind of blindly not think about it too much. But trying to focus on this individual game, right, in a vacuum, there's not a world where I back the 49ers here. I think the injury concerns are far too much. Ricky Pearsall might play, and he's probably the only receiver on this team that's going to be able to generate separation against the Seahawks DBs, but you're going to run into a brick wall when you run up against Seattle. Seattle is the best run defense by a lot right now, and with all of their guys well rested with the bye week, I think they're going to be really ready to go, and it's going to be a really tough matchup for the 49ers. And for that reason, I think you saw some action towards the under. I think the under is still in play, right? Although it opened at 46.5, you have some 44s in market, 44.5s, I should say, but there are a couple 45.5 still out there, and that's a play for me. I would bet the under at 45.5. Again, if you look at this week 17 or week 18 game that the 49ers played with the Seahawks, it was 13-3. I'm not saying that it's going to be that low scoring again, but the Seahawks played a game where, although the score seemed a little bit closer, they were really dominant in that game. They also missed 2 field goals, which would have pushed this out even further. But San Francisco really couldn't even move the ball. They weren't able to run against the Seahawks, which we know Seahawks run defense is the best in the league. They weren't able to throw that efficiently. Brock Purdy had multiple interceptions. The Seahawks offense didn't have to do that much to keep this game out of reach for the 49ers. Although I do think they could have scored more, right? They started the game with turnover on downs in the opponent in the 49er red zone. So this game could have easily been, a 26 to 3 score, but if the Seahawks were able to, to convert on a couple more of their drives. But that being said, as we look at this week, I'm not going to lay the 7, but I do think we could enter a game state that's pretty similar to that Week 17 matchup, because the 49ers are even worse. There's nothing that is going to help the 49ers at this point. They've only gotten worse in terms of their availability. Ricky Pearsall banged up at best. George Kittle out for the season. The Demarcus Robinson breakout game was nice, but if you watch that game, it's just a broken play. The Juwan Jennings, pass to Christian McCaffrey, again, excellent play calling, really nice, really unique and good spot to use it in, but this Seattle defense is a different animal, and I don't want to rely on gadget play and broken play to warrant action on the 49ers. I think that the Seattle Seahawks are going to move forward in this game, and I think that's a good teaser spot as well. If you want to close a teaser that you use the Bills on, Seattle and Buffalo could be an interesting look. Not really, you don't really get a ton of teaser opportunities late in the playoffs, but we're probably going to end up playing a little bit of that just to get some action on the Seahawks, and I will be playing the under. A prop look I like in this game is Christian McCaffrey under 55.5 rushing yards. You saw it last week already against the Eagles rushing defense. He really struggled, and he's struggled from an efficiency standpoint almost all year. The 49ers really have not had a good rushing attack this entire 2025. They obviously use Christian McCaffrey's pass catching ability. He's like no other, right? He's one of the best offensive players in the league, but he hasn't been super efficient with the ball in his hands while rushing. I know that could be a lot about the offensive line. That could be a lot about the inability to pass the ball at times. There's a lot of factors leading up into it, but I just don't think we saw enough of an adjustment on the line, right? Last week was about 60.5 on close, which he was under again. And I think you're going to be in a similar game state against Seattle. Seattle's going to push the ball down the field and score early against the banged up 49ers defense. And Christian McCaffrey is not going to have a ton of rushing attempts. And if he does, they're going to be early when the Seattle defense is going to be geared up to stop the run. So, again, a broken play obviously always makes an under on a rushing total lose, but 55.5 should be adjusted more. This is going to be bet down during the week. I'm sure of it. But I would try to bet this pregame because I don't think this is a game that you're going to be able to get live. If Seattle comes out and scores a couple times, I think the markets are going to adjust pretty quickly live. So I would certainly look towards the under at 55.5 on Christian McCaffrey. Jumping over to Sunday, Houston Texans at New England Patriots. Texans, kind of a deceiving box score as well, 30-9 victory over the Steelers. I don't want to say they dominated that game, and they did not look very good offensively at all. Nico Collins goes down with a concussion, particularly bad one, if I might say. I don't know what his status is going to be. I doubt he plays. I think it's going to be really difficult for him to clear concussion protocol, just given the short week and given, the impact that he took. Having that game played on Monday really does not help the Texans' case here. I know when you get into the playoffs, the concussion protocol turns into a little bit of, a fairy tale, but I'd be concerned with him. If he was to go, I think he'd be really viable to go down once again. And I'm going to expect, I'm rating this as the Texans are going to be without Nico Collins. So as we look at the side on this game, it looks to me like a lot of two-way action. New England is a 3-point favorite with heavy juice. And throughout the week, we've seen this flirt with 3.5. Most of the rec books really haven't been interested in posting a 3.5. It opened at a super juice 2.5, which immediately got bad. I would say for most people probably wasn't even accessible unless you were looking at this on Monday night. And at this point in the week, right, took a bunch of Patriots money, and then kind of as you got into those cheap 3.5 or expensive 3.5s for the Texans, expensive 3s for the Patriots, you're seeing some buyback on the Texans. You're seeing a little bit of a bite, but I think the markets are going to hold pretty close to 3 on this one, and I think you're going to see a juice 3 for the Patriots all week. And if you see some 3.5s out there, they're going to be probably minus 120 or minus 125 for the Texans. So again, on the side, not planning on getting involved in this one. I do lean the Patriots at the number. I think the number is actually fine. The Patriots are deserving of being favorites over the Texans at this point. So from an offensive perspective, right, we know that the Texans are probably the second best, if not the best defense in the NFL. They kind of go hand in hand with the Broncos. I'm very glad that Drake May got a playoff game under his belt. I don't want to call it a playoff stinker because I think we usually associate that with a rookie or a young quarterback getting a playoff loss out of the way, but obviously, the offense did not look like they did all year. We talked about a lot how the Patriots haven't really played anybody all year, and we were concerned with how their offense and especially their defense would translate into the playoffs where they're going to start to play teams of higher caliber. So as we saw against the Chargers, the defense held up, and again, we can blame part of that on play call and injury for the Chargers, but the offense really was surprisingly inefficient. Drake May was a bit puzzled at times with what they were running, and they didn't get the explosives that they generally get this far in the season. They're going to get a step up to play the Texans, but I don't think that they're going to have the same kinds of issues that they had last week. The Texans defense is one of the best in the league, yes, but how you beat them, I think, is exactly how the Patriots want to play. What I like the most about Drake May and this Patriots offense is their ability to attack a defense multiple different ways. they don't have a, consistency issue where, they really only have one efficient way to score the ball, right? They only say, hey, okay, we're going to spam this. We're going to spam the X player. We're going to continue to run this play. The Patriots are able to spread the ball. They have a pretty deep receiving core. I know not a lot of them are elite like Stephon Diggs, but they're really able to move the ball nicely by doing different things. And I think they're more than happy to, give the running backs targets. They're more than happy to hit tight ends on the seams. So if you have, some of the better cornerbacks in the league with Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, if he's healthy, which he's going to play, but we've been trying to keep an eye out on his actual ability, given the injuries that he's had all season. But they're willing to take what the defense gives them, and I think what the Texans are going to continue to give up is kind of this short passing game up the middle, where you can kind of attack them with tight ends or running backs. I would expect a bunch of targets towards your Hunter Henrys, your Austin Hoopers, and as well as Ramondre Stevenson out of the backfield. So where you can also beat the Texans is trying to stretch them out down the field. Stingley is a great cornerback, right? And their cornerbacks have been good all year, but there's only so many times that you can throw the ball down the field and not get a PI in today's NFL. There's only so many times that there's only so many people on the field that are going to be able to cover. So if you have the constant threat of throwing the deep ball, you have multiple guys who can run the deep ball, right? You could throw a deep ball to Diggs. You can throw it out there to Demario Douglas. They've used Chisholm now integrated into the offense, and Kyle Williams as well. You have all of these guys that are willing to go down the field. You have a quarterback in Drake May who throws an excellent deep ball and is willing to test the defense. I think that's going to they're either going to hit those explosives or they're going to open up the middle of the field for their tight ends. So again, not really a pregame look for me, but more, I would love to see how the Patriots end up attacking this Texans defense. And if they are going to be able to take what they can give them, and if the Texans' pressure is going to get home on Drake May. Drake May has been excellent all year under pressure. He has been sacked a ton, but it hasn't really mattered in terms of their win and loss. So I'm curious how they're going to look against one of the best defenses in the NFL, where we've almost treated the Patriots offense like a bit of a time bomb, where at some point maybe we think the pressure is going to be too much. We think that allowing this much pressure or getting sacked at this rate is going to be an issue for Drake May, but it just hasn't happened yet. And that could partially be because of the caliber that the quality of the teams that they've played being lower, stepping up to play the caliber defense that the Texans are. That might be a different story, but I don't know. I think at this point in time, a 3 is probably the right number, but I think the Patriots are going to be able to score. That being said, I do lean a little bit on the under on the side. You've seen some two-way action on the 40.5 or the 41.5. Under at 41.5 has been a play, and some markets have taken over at 40.5 just because it keeps popping back and forth. Neither of these are particularly key numbers. I don't think you get bet through 41.5, but if for whatever reason you did, with even if they said Nico Collins is going to play, and that forces people to bet the over, 42.5 would be a certain bet on the under. I don't think we're going to get there. So at 41.5, I also lean under. I lean Patriots. I'm not going to play it pregame, but I don't think the Patriots are going to have as difficult a time as they did against the Chargers, which, again, it might be a little bit surprising, but I'm happy that Drake May got this game under his belt, and he should be able to score on this Texans defense. All right, we'll get our last game in here, and that is the Rams going to Chicago to take on the Bears. The Bears, they scare me a little bit right now. The Bears feel like a team of destiny a little bit. I know the Steelers kind of had that vibe coming into last week, but especially just kind of getting that game after almost certainly looking like a loss. Bears confidence must be at an all-time high. Ben Johnson was hyped. We all saw the videos. Everybody was feeling really good about themselves. And the Rams kind of got a little bit of a scare where they did not dominate that game against the Panthers like they expected. I'm very concerned with the defense. We've been kind of waiting for the defense to start to pick it back up after being one of the better defenses in the league in the first couple weeks of the season, or the first couple months, honestly. now that we're into the playoffs, really hoping they would round back into form. Getting Quentin Lake back was, what I thought would be a key piece for them, but the defense continues to struggle. They are generating a bunch of pressure, so I think they'll continue to do that. And the Bears' offensive line, from a pass protection standpoint, has been okay this year. Caleb has certainly taken far less sacks than he did last year, but still susceptible, to kind of a really rough sack. So I think what we're looking at here is a team that is riding high, and a team that is kind of going under the radar as what I believe to be the short shot favorite to win the Super Bowl. The Rams, I don't know how many times they talked about Matt Stafford's hand. I think he's fine. I know that, it probably hurt when he got his hand hit on that helmet. I think I saw that replay probably 37 times during the broadcast, which was, frustrating. But we heard it. We know he didn't break his hand. He's okay. Perhaps we'll see some more coverage about, the physical therapy he did this week, or, maybe he got a cortisone shot or something like that. I don't know what they're going to talk about with his hand, but I think he's all right. Offense looks great, right? Offense moved the ball. Offense scored 31 points, and they probably should have scored a bunch more. Big drop from Puka Nacua. That would have been a touchdown. Big drop from Devontae Adams. That would have set up a field goal or a touchdown. So I think this Rams offense is scratching the ceiling of what they could accomplish. Obviously, getting all their guys back last week was key for them. Devontae Adams was a full go. He looked okay. I mean, I haven't seen Devontae Adams drop multiple balls in his career, but we did see that last week, and I think that they're going to be fine going forward. They need to round into form. Where I want to talk about this game is on the total. So this game opens up at 51.5, and immediately bet down during the week. And I'm a little bit surprised, because generally what we've seen throughout the season with the Soldier Field games is weather reports driving the totals. We've seen a bunch of games where getting a ton of wind, getting a bunch of snow, getting a bunch of this, and that's been forcing the market to bet some games down. When I look at the radar for this one, or I'm just looking for information, I'm not really seeing that. It's going to be cold. It is going to be brutally cold in Chicago. But as we know, the cold is not necessarily that impactful, especially if you have two offenses that are really going to efficiently run the ball. I'm not super worried about the cold. The wind, right? We're seeing sustained winds in the 10-mile-an-hour range, gusts at 20-25. This is kind of typical for Soldier Field. I'm not really sure why such a strong move from 51.5 all the way down to 48.5. Again, a little bit of wind is concerning for kicking and down the field throws. The cold is not great. Nobody likes to play in the cold, but I'm not seeing that this warrants such a strong move. I'm a little bit afraid to go against the market, especially come the playoffs, when I just talked about how efficient the lines are and, kind of how good everybody's information is at this point. But I'm going to go opposite market here. I'm going to go opposite the line move. I think over 48.5 is a fine bet. I don't see how the Rams don't move the ball at will. I think if this game goes under 48.5, it's because the Rams are dominating and they just don't feel like scoring anymore. I have a hard time seeing where Chicago is going to be able to win this game. I think the Rams offense is just like the Chicago defense has relied on turnover the entire year. And yeah, they kind of got away with one against the Packers where they didn't need to turn over Jordan Love, but the Bears' entire defense has been predicated on turning the ball over. We talked about it last week. Success rate is not there. The pass game is a funnel. I think Matt Stafford, cold or not, is going to be able to pick this team apart. Again, I get it. If it's really cold out and his finger hurts, it's not going to be that great. But Matt Stafford's a professional. He's played in this division for a long time where, I know Detroit's been inside, but he's played at Green Bay. He's played at Chicago. He understands these conditions. It's not like you're getting, some warm weather quarter. It's not like you're getting Tua Tagovailoa there, right? Who's never played in conditions like this in his career and obviously gets whacked in the colds, right? Matt Stafford has, there's a lot of talk about LA teams, warm weather teams going into the cold, especially during the playoffs. And again, I get it. I can see how conceptually that makes sense, but I don't think that's an angle that I'm really concerned with in this game. An alternate look is just taking the Rams team total. I know we did that last week at 27.5. It's going to be a little bit lower than that this week, but I think that's a good look as well. I'll probably end up playing both. Just because I think the Bears will be able to score a little bit against the Rams defense that has surprisingly, started to be pretty poor. But what I'm really looking at from an angle in this game is the Rams taking advantage of a Chicago defense that's just way overrated. Getting pressure on Caleb Williams, maybe generating some turnovers that is able to get us into a short field. So I think the Rams on the team total is perfectly fine, but my play will be the over in the game at 48.5. That's going to do it for this episode and this season of the Noise Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Really appreciate all the love and support that we got. Make sure you guys are in the Discord. I know you heard me say it all year, but the Discord is the only place to get all of my bets in real time. Please make sure you join. The link is always available in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify, please make sure you like, rate, and subscribe as well. Thank you guys so much for listening to this season of the Noise Podcast. This is your host, Max Gilson. Godspeed.